do these very often, but it's time for another pin. My niece called me the other day and said, Uncle Billy, I lost the pin you gave me for my high school graduation, and I would really appreciate it if you could make me another. So that's what I'm going to do. This time I'm going to use her favorite color, which is orange. And I'm also going to have it laser engraved so that it'll have less of a, let's say, chance of walking off of her desk. She wants it for her desk at work. So let's make Allison's pin. Okay, I put these on the table saw and I squared them up better than they were. Made them about 3/4 of an inch. That's really all you need. Actually, you can get by with a 5/8 or a 1/2 inch blank even for a Slimline, if you're really good at your drilling. I have an expensive pin vise that I can use on my drill press, but I find if I drill on the lathe, I get a straighter hole, even with the expensive pin vise. And I think it's probably more because of the quality of my drill press than anything else. So I'm going to drill these out. 7mm bit. First I'm going to start with a center bit. Machinists use these all the time to make sure they find the dead center of what they're drilling, because the drill bit has a tendency to want to dance around. You'll notice a mark. I do this with all my pins. This is how I cut it apart. This is so the grain will line up after I turn my piece. This will always be the fit side. So this is where if I was going to use a center band, this is where the center band would go. I'm not going to use a center band, so we'll have better grain flow anyway. And yes, swirly acrylics do have grain-like characteristics. A lot of people don't take much thought to such things, and they just put their pens together pretty much willy-nilly. I don't like that. I'm more of a perfectionist. I can't help it. See, we get no, like you've seen. The reason I'm taking this in small bites is because this resin has a tendency to pack up and it gets hot, and that's what causes synthetic blanks to crack, either now or later. See, I'm not getting this bit hot, so hot that I can't touch it. Now this is inlace acrylister. It has a tendency to be quite brittle. Inlace acrylister is made from Slimline 41 polyester resin. I've never turned one of these that wasn't brittle. I used to cast my own polyester resin blanks. I've started using Alumilite now if I want to do that, because this stuff is just too brittle. You drop it on the floor, even a completed pin, it breaks. Alumilite won't break for you. Now I want to go deep enough, but not necessarily all the way through. Again, because this stuff is really brittle, if you go all the way through, I almost guarantee you'll have a blowout on the back end. Okay, I've gone just deeper now, and I did that for a reason. Okay, I'm gonna try to go all the way through on this one, just to show you, and I'm gonna be careful, just show you that your tendency to blow out on the back. Normally I stop there, and I take this over to the bandsaw, and I cut the end off, and boom, I've got a perfect blank. Well, I'll be. Once in a blue moon, I'll drill one of these out and it don't blow up at the back. Normally there's about an 1/8 inch deep chip here, but as you can see, there is one little chip, but it's not too bad, and that's going to go away. And that came out pretty square. Holes relatively in the middle, just like here. But even so, I want to line my ends up. I will drill this end. Always drill the marked end. That guarantees your center lines up. I'm not going to risk this one. I'm only going to take it as far as I need to take it. And the bit is still cool enough to touch. So I didn't overheat it. That's always a good thing. And I didn't go through. Oh my goodness, Billy, you didn't go through that. What are you going to do now? How are you going to fix this? Pretty easy, really. I went deeper than I needed to. And if you notice, these are the two marked ends. The holes are dead center, so that ensures my grain will line up the way it needs to. So how are you going to fix that? Pretty easy, really. I'm going to lay my pen blank up here. I started with excess on both of these. They're both longer than they need to be. And the tube lengths on a 7mm slim are the same, top and bottom. So I cut this just a little bit deeper. If I take this to my bandsaw jig and I cut this off with a bandsaw, I will open that hole up. Let me show you. And that's all I cut off right there, that little bit where that line was. Voila, perfect. And you can see the little dimple in there. So that's how you drill synthetic blanks without blowing them up. What I want to do now is the same thing that I did with this one, and I want to shorten this up a little bit because I don't need all that material on there. I want enough so that when I use my pen mill, I get these flush, but I just want them ever so slightly longer. Let me go get this one cut off and we'll get to gluing the tubes in. Okay, I've taken these tubes over to my 1-inch fill sander and I roughed them up. Not too bad, but just enough. You got to give them some bite for the epoxy. I do not use super glue. I've told y'all that before. I've had too many failures with super glue. With the colors of these, it wouldn't be terrible if I left the pen tube natural brass, but I'm not sure where the orange gets a little bit thin. I'm afraid it would dull it down more than I want. So in order to prevent that, I'm going to color these tubes orange. And to do that, I just use an orange Sharpie. Just get all of the grass open up. Just like that. Let that sit a little bit. I could use 5-minute or 30-minute epoxy for this. I'm not going to. I'm just going to use regular epoxy. Mix up a liberal amount. You don't want to short yourself. These little coffee stirrers make wonderful mixers of epoxy. And they're small enough they make a decent applicator as well. So not only will they mix your epoxy, they'll let you apply it. I like using these especially for pens because one of the things I like to do is come inside here and coat the inside. That helps ensure that I don't have any void on the inside from the glue. And now I just start applying it to the tube. Got one end thoroughly soaked. Insert it first in the end with your mark on it. And twist it and spin it as you go. Drag the epoxy up and seat your blank. And you want it seated just not quite flush, just a little inside. Again, the end that you marked. And the pen mill will take care of the rest of that. And now we wait. I will let those cure overnight. Yeah, I could use, if I used 5-minute epoxy, I could start on them in a few hours. But like I said, I'm not really in that big a hurry. When I'm turning pens, I typically turn between centers because I don't like mandrels. But I've been doing this so long. They didn't have the mandrel saver. That actually is a pretty cool tool. So rather than turning between centers this time, I'm actually going to use my mandrel saver. And I will turn both of these blanks at the same time. You see how this goes together? I knocked the corners of this off on the bandsaw so it would be a quicker turn and easier to do because like I said, this stuff is brittle. I have hit these on the barrel trimmer and trimmed them up. These are my mating pieces where the grain will line up. So once I get those marks turned away, I won't know where what is. So one of the tricks that I use is I take a Sharpie and I mark the inside of the tube, and hopefully by the time I'm done, there will be enough marks left on the inside to let me know where I am and which side is which. So I'm going to mark this good on the inside with this Sharpie. Just a little trick to keep me oriented correctly. Now, I'm not going to turn this Slimline in the traditional fashion. I'm going to turn what I call a modified Slimline. It will not be using a center band. I usually do it by eye. You don't have to. I've got two different size washers here, and they are perfect diameter for this mandrel. So now what I have to decide is which orientation do I want to use. Do I want this to be the nib end and this the cap, or this the cap and this the nib end? Those are the kind of decisions that you have to make. Well, I'm going to make this the nib end. So this end will be turned down to the bushings. This end will be turned down to the small washer. This end will be turned to the big washer, and this end down to the bushing. If you're going to turn pins, I highly recommend you use a mandrel saver. The way the traditional mandrels are set up, this goes into the headstock just like this one does. This one, on the other hand, uses a 60-degree live center on the end. And the reason that these can be problematic is because as you put pressure on this rod, it will flex. And you can see just from my fingers that it's flexing. At least I hope you can see that. So the more pressure you put on it, the more it bends, and you should be only tightening this. This should be just up here snug, and this is what you should use. You use your nut to tighten the stuff up. A lot of people forget that and will crank on this and bend this, and so when you're turning it, you end up with an eccentric turning, meaning not round, as opposed to concentric, which is perfectly round. This alleviates the bend problem. And like I said, I typically turn between centers, which also alleviates the bend problem. Now, I want just enough pressure on here to keep this blank from turning or spinning while I'm trying to turn it. That should be tight enough. And I'm cranking about 1200 RPM. You have to be careful when you're doing that. Like I said, this stuff is brittle. It could have, you can see where it chipped out. That could have chipped out below the bushing, and that would have been a bad thing. So I'm going to try to get rid of that excess as quickly as I can. And then use the scraper. You don't hear the tear so much. This really likes scraper. Okay, so that I don't have chip out anymore, especially at the ends, I'm going to go ahead and take these ends to dimension. I have to put it around after I get it finished. So far, I think that's yeah. We'll see how it goes. I have to see a little crowd where I want to sand it. That's not what I like to do. I'm starting at 120. This one I won't need to use 120. Okay, that's 320. Now I will wet sand. Almost forgot. I'm going to start with 180. I'm going to round this corner up some. And there's one more thing I like to do to these. I will fill those with the same colored paint that I fill her laser engraving with. That's looking pretty good. I will wet sand from here on out using, I'm going to start at 400 and then go to micro mesh. When I get set up for that, I'll come back. Okay, here we go. It's important to note when you're using micro mesh that you always use a backer. This is just an old piece of mouse pad. This 400 is new and it doesn't like to have water sitting on it. So I'm going to start there. About 600 RPM is all you really need. I'm going to give this a good sand. You see the slurry is building up. I will spend the bulk of my sanding time at this grit, making sure that I've removed any of the fine scratches. Wash all my slurry off. Okay, stop that and give it a check. One of the things you want to make sure you do is wipe any residue off between grits. That's important because you don't want any possible grit from the 400 to contaminate the next step. See, that looks pretty good right there. A lot of people would stop there and say, okay, that's good enough. And then spray it with lacquer or put a CA finish, something else on it. This is resin. It doesn't need a finish. And I will show you that in just a minute. Right now, I need to take this piece off before I continue sanding. So when I get that off of there, I'll come back. Okay, now we go on to the next grit, which is the 1500 micro mesh. Really, is it really doing anything? I don't see much of a slurry. No, with the 1500 and most of the micro mesh, you won't see a whole lot of slurry, but there's some, see? And again, wipe off the grit. Don't take much and it don't take long. And you can see it's already starting to shine pretty good. 2400. 3200. 3600. 4000. 6000. 8000. Last one, 12,000. Get a dry one and wipe that off again. See how shiny that is? Not bad. Not bad at all. But guess what? It can be better. What? What are you gonna do? CA? Lacquer? No. We'll get set up for it and I'll come back. And the last step is this stuff. Novus Plastic Polish 2 Fine Scratch Remover. Now we're going to bust this in. We're about 900 RPM right now. There's a really fine abrasive in this. Some say there was a big discussion about this on the International Association of Pen Turners forum several years back, like 15 years ago. And some have said, well, if you look at the stats or the specifics, Micromesh 1200 takes the piece to a finer grit than Novus 2 Fine Scratch Remover. So you're actually supposedly going backwards in grit by using the Novus, according to specifications and some people. Well, you remember what it looked like a minute ago. And yes, this is a t-shirt. I do not use shop towel because a shop towel won't get this as smooth as cotton. The wood fibers in the paper towel or the shop towel will actually add more scratches than it removes. So you be the judge. I think it's more shiny now than it was before. It's perfect. So at this point, I'm going to take this off. I will take this to an engraver to have her name engraved in the top barrel. And when I get it back, I will color in the engraving and I will color in these two grooves. Yeah, I spoke with the people that are going to do my engraving and they said put it together. So that's what I'm going to do. My pieces and parts lined up. I don't have one of those fancy pen presses. I made my own that I can use on my lathe. I just find it works better. A couple of blocks of oak that are turned, drilled to the right dimension to go on these, my spindle and my tailstock quill, and two pieces of corian that I turned down the same size as well. I'm going to do the nib in first. This is a fancy black titanium kit. You don't want to push it in so hard that you fracture the resin. Don't ask me how I know that. And see, that looks pretty good. Now we can push the transmission in. I'm going to go just shy of the line. That's probably not going to be deep enough. But there's a line on there that tells you how deep to push your transmission usually. Unless you've made your barrel too short, then you've pushed it in too much. And this is just about right. So I will leave it like that. Slimlines are really easy to put together. All you have to do is press in the nib end, transmission to the right depth, and then push the clip and the button in the other end. I like to give the blank a look over and see where I want clip. I typically try to pick the least attractive side for the clip. This particular side has more yellow in it, so that's where I'm going to put the clip. You just want to push it in so that it's nice and snug and doesn't move around. And that's how you assemble a slimline. Now, again, this side has the most yellow, so to line this grain up, if you will, even though this is resin, it's not wood, it still has somewhat of a grain structure. the most of the yellow is right here, and the most of the swirl is right here. So I'm going to line the swirl up. And I think it looks pretty good. Works fine. I think she'll enjoy it, or appreciate it nonetheless. What do you think? It ain't done yet. I've still got to put paint in these grooves, which is easy, and I'll show you that when I get it back from the engraver. And I've still got to have her name engraved in it. But for all intents and purposes, this is done. So that's how you make a modified Slimline using a standard Slimline kit. You don't need to buy the Slimline Pros and the more expensive kits to get a pen that doesn't look like a cross pen. So here you have it, one modified Slimline. You can do it with a regular Slimline kit. You just have to make one end a little bigger than normal and one end a little bigger than that. When this is all done, and I've got her names engraved in it and I get everything filled, then I will put pictures up on my Facebook page and Instagram, and I'll put pictures up on my community page. Wood would have been a whole lot faster and wouldn't have given me near as many problems, but you know, that's the way turning goes.